Nurturing the startup ecosystem.
The startup space is as I can say from personal experience, is a very interesting and challenging space for a lot of people. Requires a lot of resilience and also you have to play your cards right. So we've got some experts here to help us navigate that. Would you mind just giving yourself a brief introduction to the audience?
Can you guys hear me? Cool. Yeah, so I'm Shaheer. I run the hub in Southern Africa for a blockchain protocol called Internet Computer. It's $1 billion market cap all over the world. So we help startups on the Web3 front. Some of those startups are in the traditional space, moving over to the Web3 space, but primarily on the Web3 side. And then we also help in terms of blockchain adoption, training developers, nurturing startups and stuff as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Rush?
Yeah, sure. So I run a business called W30 Labs, and essentially what we're doing is we're creating a sustainable ecosystem for Web3 startups. So within that ecosystem, we essentially run incubators, which take early stage Web3 startups through idea to MVP. And then we're also in the process of creating physical hubs and potentially raising a fund. So we can almost take startups from an idea to launch and then essentially set them up for long-term success. So yeah, we're playing in the early stage space for startups, and we're essentially giving them the wings to grow and create real-world impact on the African continent, at least for now.
Thank you. And last but not least, we've got Asal.
Hello, everyone. So happy to be here. I'm Asal, co-founder and CEO of Blocklogica Labs. We are an accelerator and fundraising hub based in Dubai, UAE. We mainly help Web3 and blockchain-focused startups to grow and scale and launch. And we also help them to find the right investors. We sometimes do some investments as well. So our main expertise is helping the startups to grow and also collaborating with foundations to manage their grant systems and also add more value rather than just adding financial value to the startups in their ecosystems.
Awesome, thank you. Let's start off with the idea phase and validation, which is really where you start at the very beginning anyway. Let's look at what makes a startup idea viable in South Africa. I'd like to start with Rush here, if you don't mind. You've built W30 Labs from the ground up. What are the key elements that define a strong startup idea in the South African ecosystem? Think local challenges and opportunities.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think the one thing that you have to look at is how is your potential startup or your business idea actually solving something that is a real problem in our, call it South African ecosystem or African ecosystem, especially if you want to target scale. So I think like when you look at the South African perspective, we've got a couple of development issues. We've got unemployment issues. We've got jobs that we need to create. We've got electricity shortages. You can name it. And I think if you can plug into, yes, my startup could be, solving a tech problem, but does that tech problem then give the ability of that startup to then generate jobs, generate a sustainable ecosystem around it, and potentially look to, solve some of the big issues in the country? Then I think your startup actually has room and legs to start making bigger strides. Our problems in the country are unique. They're not something that you'd find in like a first world economy. So you kind of have to have your feet on the ground and be, cognizant that, meme tokens as an example, that's not something that's going to, tick the box here. We want to do real world impact type of things. So I think that's kind of like where I'd pivot from.
And I guess also a smaller market, obviously, you launch something in the US, you got a big audience to hit immediately off the bat. Here you have to kind of grind with a smaller audience and try and grow it that way. Exactly. Thank you. Shaheer, in Web3, ideas need real world traction. How can entrepreneurs validate their concepts to ensure they're solving actual market needs here?
Yeah, I think we spoke about the validating process in terms of starting off, right? I think in an immature market or like a third world market, that process might be a bit longer, and you may need to have a much more open mind. I think startup founders in general have an idea that they fall in love with and they really want to push it through, but you need to have a much more open mind, because also specifically in South Africa, there's so many different demographics and spaces. The ecosystem in Cape Town versus Johannesburg versus Durban, all completely different, right? Depending on your startup. So I think the validation process is a test out, right? Get an MVP, have your customer feedback, and make sure you continuously iterating to get a solid MVP and proof of concept. And once you have the right data and you feel that you have all the data makes sense to push forward, I would say at that point you've validated your idea. And then you can look at raising some capital, or if you have your own personal capital, add money. But I would say the validation phase should be as lean as possible.
Very good advice. Asal, I know you're out in Dubai, but is there some learnings that we can take from Dubai and implement them in the South African market, just based on your experience out of Dubai?
Oh, interesting question. To be honest, I feel like one of the reasons why I really wanted to participate in this event and experience Cape Town was that I think the adoption of crypto here in this region, and especially in South Africa, is really amazing. It's something that I think we also are privileged to have it in the UAE. And I think there is a lot that can be done. I believe that the main difference that maybe is driving the UAE market a bit faster when it comes to startups is the facilitations in the regulation part. And obviously the support that comes from the government, and us knowing that our investments are supported by the government obviously is a positive point. But in general, I believe that there is a huge potential in South Africa. That's what I believe. And it's such an amazing place, amazing people, amazing community. So I think there is a really great potential with a great adoption of crypto and Web3 in the region. I believe that if it goes more into, right education and right incubation, I would say, it can really reach to higher level of being, competing with the rest of the jurisdictions in the world. And that includes obviously more capital allocation in the right way, in the right type of startups, because I think we have crypto platforms like, investment, trading, and etc. And then we have Web3 solutions. So I think with a shift towards the Web3 native narratives, there can be lots of potential, lots of growth here. And then I believe that there is lots of capital around the globe that would be interested to, be deployed here and use the adoption that is here potentially.
Exactly, that's a good answer. So basically what you're saying is that, it would open new investment opportunities, open new doors. I mean, if you look at India, for example, third world country, they've got the highest crypto adoption in the world. There's no reason why that can't eventually start happening in Africa. And again, like you said, opens new doors. Rush, there's a little bit of overlap with your previous question, but just in terms of market research, are there any specific challenges that you've noticed that would be unique to South Africa, or is it really more what you've already alluded to?
I mean, Asal mentioned regulation.
Yes.
I'd say right now it's an uncertain environment, especially when I speak to startup founders at the early stage. A lot of them have this hesitancy around, how am I going to build something that doesn't have regulation, or, I don't know what license to apply for, and it creates this confusion and potentially a stumbling block where they could be building momentum and actually getting something off the ground. They've got no guidance or leeway. So I'd say that's a big thing. Pro Web3 regulation would definitely be something that's, would improve that hurdle or barrier to entry. Then I also just say access to capital. I think, South Africa generally, right now, if you're going to have access for capital as an entrepreneur, it's a highly competitive market and it's a low liquidity market as well. So, yeah, I'd say those 2 points.
Yeah, just on that, I was going to actually ask that later on in the funding part, but we might as well touch on it now. I've noticed, in South Africa, for example, funders will look more at, say, your ROI and your and you know your customer and your financials a lot more closely than say they would in the US. In the US, funders will tend to look more at the vision, the team, and kind of imagine, forward project. If you execute, you know, this is what you'll achieve, and they see the bigger picture, and they're happier, more ready to fund larger amounts based on less data and statistics. Do you find that is to be an accurate assessment in South Africa?
I would say the risk appetite is completely different. And whether or not that stems from traditional PE dominating the space and a lack of venture capital firms who've been able to raise funder funds and build those relationships, it's two-ended. But I would say there's a different risk appetite. And I think if, you know, to solve for that, if we were able to give fund managers or create a more competitive market for raising capital, I think at the fund level, we'd be able to see a trickle down of how we could then, open up VCs who have a little bit more of a, call it, visionary approach to their investments than pure ROI metrics.
That's super interesting. Thank you. Regarding building a proof of concept, Shaheer, how critical is a proof of concept for startups, especially in Web3? And what's the best practice for building one in South Africa?
Yeah, just to touch on what you guys are speaking about,
sure.
and also the proof of concept. I mean, you can give a textbook answer on proof of concept, but let's have a discussion, right?
Sure.
I mean, nurturing the startup ecosystem. When I look at the ecosystem right now, I wouldn't even, if it's really new startups, I wouldn't even think about VCs and funding. The world is moving to a different space now. Everything's online. You have access to your customers directly, millions of customers, whether you're in South Africa or Brazil or whatever. So for me, it's about, I think, if you don't have a lot of money and you have like intelligence and you're resourceful and stuff, it's about really building a community, collaborating with people, building a network, and building a proper MVP and testing. You can do that, obviously not for free, but for much less money. I think one of the things that bogs down startups is like, I need to build an MVP, spend all my money on that, and then I go on like, okay, VCs. Like one of the first question for every startup that we have in our ecosystem is, hey man, can you introduce us to VCs? Yeah. Right? That's like 99.9%. So staying true to the concept. I don't want to say, okay, proof of concept is important because of this and that. If you got the mindset, the proof of concept is going to happen, you'll find out all of that stuff. But you need to understand what culture we're living in. Also, the startup that you are going to start, you also need to understand that, especially I'm looking at gaming projects and all of these things, in 6 months to a year, it might be completely like old news, you know? So it's more about the mindset. And I think the easiest way to do that is to work with players in the space. So if you're looking at startups in South Africa, go to guys like Rhurshail, who has an incubation. They've seen the thing from the bird's eye view, right? What's happening? Go to local accelerators, incubators. They have all the things that you need. You may not get in, or you may not particularly be the top guy there, but it's all about a startup mindset where you're I'm going to get in here, I'm going to build my network, I'm going to meet some VCs, they'll say no, but I'll know what to do the next time.
Sure.
The startup incubator is going to know all the regulatory things, they're going to have their own lawyers, all of those things. So it's really, for me, about networking and just getting into the spaces that you see yourself in. That's, for me,
That's a good answer. But it's also a bit chicken and egg, you know, like you want to build a community, but sometimes, I know you said if you hustle, you can do it cheaply, but building a network or a community does also cost money, and sometimes you need a little bit of juice to keep you going. But yeah.
I get it, but what I'm trying to say is the VC conversation always comes up, but it comes up like way before you need
too early.
Yeah. So there's so many other things before we come to that question.
So people basically jumping the gun. They're trying to get from A to Z before going B, C, D, E, F is what you're trying to say. Yeah, I mean, I guess, Rhurshail, some funding options available for South African startups. Could you speak a little bit to that?
I mean, funding options are varied. We've got good networks, for example, in our incubators with LISC as an ecosystem. So they offer non-dilutive grants in the Web3 space. But I think from there, right now, if you look at the VC landscape in South Africa, at least, it's quite dried up. not many options, but that's also correlated to global liquidity as well. So it's a tough time to be raising. But it's back to my point. I think there needs to be, in the next cap of a liquidity cycle in the country, funder funds looking at new venture capital firms that have a different type of vision. Otherwise, you're going abroad. And I think that's when people turn to the Middle East, as an example, because that's where you get your access to capital. So,
Thank you. And Asal, what's one piece of advice for startups pitching to investors or applying for grants?
Good question. I think the main thing is to cut the extra work. I think one of the biggest problems that the founders do while raising is that they are so deep in the idea that they have in their head that while pitching, there is just too much extra information that is unnecessary, and it just confuses the investor. And if the investor is not understanding what you're saying, they wouldn't invest in you, It doesn't matter how much slides of lots of numbers you have, but if you're just putting too much complication, it doesn't help. So I always say that you just need to, first of all, have a proper problem-solving statement, and make sure that the problem is not made up in your head. The problem actually exists. So just say, what are you solving? How are you solving it? How are you different than others? And who are you? And the important thing is that I understand that it's a problem of chicken and egg, but also from an investor perspective, you need to have a proof that you are able to do what you are saying that you want to do. So either this comes with a proper background of the team, which you need to have really strong, strong background, strong logos on your pitch. And also, if you don't have the background, then you need to have a community. So I think one of the biggest problems that founders are making is that they start building and building and building, and then they come to us and are like, we have been building for 3 years. I'm like, okay, how much community do you have? 0. Okay, that is not acceptable, because I understand that you have been building, but Web3 is all about community. Want it or not, you have a perfect product. As long as you don't have the community and you don't have the demand on the market, always the success of your project is kind of tied to a financial market. You need to care about the supply and demand. So I think that's really important to start building the community from early days. Don't leave it for the time that you have the product fully ready. And either you need the community, or you need good supporters, or you need a really, really legit team. And if you don't have any of these, the idea wouldn't be enough to sell it to the investors. And also make sure to, make sure to not only be selling to the investor, try to make, personal connection to the investor, because people invest through trust, not through numbers. So they need to trust you, and you need to build that trust.
Wow, that's amazing advice. I think I'm guilty of some of those things. As a startup founder, I get maybe too passionate about my project and get tangled in the details when pitching. And, the point there is, kind of dumb it down, bring a community, make sure you're spending less time on just the product, but also spend an equal amount of time, if not more, on building the community. So fantastic advice there. Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? Doesn't look like it. But thank you. I learned a lot. Really appreciate your time and your insights. And actually, I'd love to have a chat with you guys after as well.
Can I
Thank
just
you
make
so much.
Yes, you want to say one more thing?
One final point.
Please.
Yes, so I'm looking at the crowd. It's more gaming and not so Web3. I just want to tell everyone there's huge opportunities for free funding in Web3. All these blockchain protocols will give you grants to use their blockchain. And because it's not South African based, the minimum you can get is $5,000 up to $25,000, even $100,000, depending on how good your product is. But it's a real loophole for South African projects, because a $5,000 grant for them is just a test out. But for us, it's almost $100,000, right?
Yeah.
So, we've given grants. I think the biggest grant we've given in South Africa is $50,000, equity free. And we've given a lot of 5 and 10 sort of. And then I know Rhurshail and stuff are working with Lisk as well. So it's a big loophole in the funding.
But then you have to pick your
I don't know
blockchain,
if
right?
You want to add to that?
You have to pick your blockchain. You can't.
If it's a $5,000 grant, in general, you need to have an element of that blockchain in your product. But yeah, it's
a good point. I've actually seen those coming up, Cardano, Avalanche,
Yeah,
etc.
you'll see projects with Cardano, ICP, Ethereum,
Yes.
a whole lot. So it's
Yeah.
just a loophole. I shouldn't be saying that, but
No, it's valuable. It's a valuable boost for a lot of startups who may be having trouble or too early for VCs.
yeah.
That's an avenue that they can look at to get some juice.
But just as a, I mean, I agree with you. But also, it was always like, I was always wondering, whenever we have an application open for our accelerator, I have never seen a startup from South Africa. So I feel like the reach is also not there. I don't know what is the reason. I hope that more events like this happen with a more focus on Web3 in this region. I personally am super excited to be here. So I feel like there is a communication issue and there is a like isolation. So if the doors get open, I'm super sure that the rest of the world would also be interested to invest here.
Good point. Thanks so much. We're a little bit over, but it was so much fun. It's always a good sign when you go over.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot for
Thank
your
you.
time.